Okay, so welcome to this ESS BIZGRANTS webinar. The feature today was to look at the Export Market Development Grant. If you have any questions on any of the matters that I raised during this webinar, can you please type your question into your computer and in webinar jargon, raise your hand, and I will answer the questions later in the webinar. We said that we would have an overview of the Export Market Development Grant. This is a very important grant for small medium enterprises. It's available for businesses with turnovers under $50 million. It assists in the development of exports. Grants are paid to the export principal who have undertaken the work. The grant is administered by Austrade, which is the abbreviated name for the Australian Trade Commission. It's got 110 offices around the world and 18 in Australia, so it's got a fair representation of what's going on in over 60 countries. So what's included? A client can obtain overseas market visits. Now it's important to remember that you don't have to be actually exporting to claim this grant. If your client is planning on commencing exports, in other words, doing the exploratory work, they could be eligible subject to incurring the minimum amount of expenditure, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the overseas market visits cover airfares, accommodation and outlays to $300 per day. Can also cover overseas representation. There are sub-limits on some of these amounts, and there's one on that one. Marketing consultants working for the company or the business. It's different from a lot of other grants. Applicants can be from any type of business activity for this grant. Communication costs, product samples, trade fair registration fees and handouts. Promotional material, bringing overseas buyers to Australia. There is sub-limits for that, but your client could bring a buyer to Australia and pay all or part of their expenditure. And general costs that are incurred in export market activities. Now, like all government grants, there's some ineligible areas, so you can't claim any of your production costs. And you can't claim the cost of setting up the business entity. And unfortunately, Export Market Development Grant does not apply to exports to New Zealand. New Zealand is basically treated as another part of Australia or a state of Australia. But it does also not apply to North Korea or Iran for completely different reasons. And the applicant has to be a resident of Australia, so as an individual or as a corporation. And if you're able to get reimbursement of the expenditure by a third party, that expenditure is not claimable. And commission or discount, anything that's illegal, pornographic, or any cash payments exceeding $10,000 are not able to be claimed under the Export Market Development Grant. So who can claim? Australian residents who are the owners of eligible goods, service, industrial property know-how. So it's the principle of the activity that is the legitimate claimant for the Export Market Development Grant. Which products and services apply? Well, anything made in Australia. Services provided outside Australia. So a legal firm operating in Sydney that's offering legal services in Vietnam can treat that as being an export market sale. Tourism activities in Australia are claimable. So anything to do with promoting tourism in foreign countries is a eligible expense under the Export Market Development Grant. Conferences or events that are targeted at overseas attendees, even though they're held in Australia, can be claimed under the Export Market Development Grant. Intellectual property work from work done in Australia, trademarks that was owned or assigned, and know-how that mainly resulted from work done in Australia. So these are the products or services that can be legitimately claimed. Now, there's been some changes to the eligible expenditure. It's now a sum of $15,000. 50% of that is able to be claimed. It was $20,000. So the minimum grant is now $7,500 and the maximum grant is $150,000. To register for this year, you have to do so between the 1st of July and the 1st of December 2015, which is the closing date for lodgement of grant applications for expenditure in the 2014-15 financial year. First-time applicants or claimants can in fact claim their minimum expenditure over a 2-year period. So if someone spent $8,000 in the first year and $10,000 in the second year, that's a total of $18,000. They exceed the $15,000, they'd be entitled to a grant of $9,000. If your client is a year 2 claimant, they should already have received their forms for the year ended 30th of June 15 from Austrade. They must lodge their application prior to the 1st of December 2015. The government's changed the rules on the grant limit. You can now claim for 8 grants. Previously it was 7. That figure's been changed a bit over the years, but it's now back to 8 grant limit. When the claim is lodged on export sales, your clients have to give a bit more information, details of the top 6 countries related to the expenses that they're claiming, details of the amount spent in each of those countries, and the details of the export sales that they've made to those countries. That's the top 6 countries. Record keeping. It's pretty essential that records are kept for this grant throughout the year. It's a bit of a task to do it all at the end of the financial year. So if you've got a client that's talking to you about export market development grant at present, our recommendation is you make sure they set up the proper systems now and keep the records in accordance with the various grant headings that you can get details of from the paper 014030. Make sure your clients have filled in travel diaries for overseas trips. It will be a lot easier to lodge the claim if those records are kept month by month, checked, signed off, and then all you've got to do at the end of the year is complete the overall form. But if you've got to go back through your client's records and extract all of that information at the end of the year, it becomes a fairly big job in lots of cases. So I'd be encouraging your client to be keeping the system throughout the year, keeping the records. Lodgement, if you're an established claimer of export market development grant, your client will receive an ASCII password to facilitate the lodgement of the claim. The assessment process works in a two-stage process. A provisional grant entitlement is processed normally fairly quickly, within 30 days or so of lodging the grant application, and the remainder is paid towards May, June of the following year. So in other words, May, June 2016, based on a proportionate share of the total claimants for Export Market and Development Grant, because there is a definite total amount of money that's available under this scheme. So the first payment that the government will make is the ceiling payment. So if your client is claiming less than $40,000, they will be paid that amount fairly quickly, normally within 30 days of lodging the grant application. If their claim is for an amount exceeding $40,000, they will be paid $40,000, with the balance that they are claiming going into a pro rata pool to be apportioned in May, June 2016, and then paid on a proportionate basis to the overall claims that are still in the system. Now that figure last year was $60,000, so that's an indication to me that there's been more interest in this grant, and on Austrade's website they're indicating that the ceiling payment for this year will be $40,000. Just remember, from your client's point of view, the taxation implications. This is assessable income, whatever the grant amount is, so it needs to be brought to account as income in the year that the grant is received. So it's assessable income in the year that the grant is received. And obviously, an exporter should be getting professional advice. So that's the overview of the Export Market Development Grant. If you have any questions on the operation of that grant, can you please type them in and send them through to me, and I will answer them later in the webinar. What we're going to do now is just revisit the ESS BIZGRANTS website. I'll just bring it up just to see if there's any questions or anything that I can add. What you have there at present is the home page. Now, the people participating in this webinar are all subscriber members, so you can just click on to the login. Obviously, put in your details. The key is to make sure that the client profile is appropriately answered with details. I'll just show you some client profile that I completed the other day. This was for another webinar. The keys you've got to be careful about here is making sure you've identified the type of entity that the client operates within, because obviously there's variations on grant availability depending on entity. I cannot think of a situation where a company is not an eligible entity for a government grant. Some of these others are not as frequent in their recognition by the government. lots of ways, I think the bureaucracy believes that you have to be in a company to be fair income in business. And as we all know, a lot of the bureaucracy are not favourably inclined towards trusts. We've asked you questions about export just so that we can link it to any export grants that are available. Imports is basically the same. There are some benefits for importers, especially if they're going to export the goods within 12 months. The number of employees, you just need to identify that, bearing in mind we've got the bands of employee numbers that have been shown in the various grants. An applicant needs an ABN. If they haven't got an ABN, they won't be offered any of these grants because you need an ABN to obtain them. The years in business is important. People ring me at times and ask what grants are there for startups. Well, the one we've just looked at today is a grant for a startup, Export Market Development Grant. There are not many other grants, but obviously research and development is one, which is really a grant that's available. You don't have to go through an application screening process. You just lodge a registration form every year. And accelerating commercialisation, which is the largest grant, $1 million on a 50-50 basis, is also available for businesses with turnovers nil to $20 million. I said businesses because an applicant can be any type of entity, but if the applicant is admitted to accelerating commercialisation, they must agree to form a company, and indeed no money will be paid to them, no documents will be signed unless they are in the name of a company. But an individual or a researcher or a partnership could be the original applicant. Turnover is important. Just a reminder, in case you haven't read what we sent out the other day, the Business Improvement Grant has had some changes made to it that is particularly beneficial for businesses north of the Tropic of Capricorn. And for those of you who don't know where the Tropic of Capricorn runs across Australia, it is just outside the southern outskirts of the city of Rockhampton in Queensland, and obviously goes right across the continent. So the areas that are north of the Tropic of Capricorn are now referred to as either being in Northern Australia or are already classified as being remote or very remote Australia. The change that has been made is that the area is now classified as Northern Australia, which in most cases is just going to be the coastal strip, because the rest of Queensland and the whole of Northern Territory and the northwest of Western Australia were already in the remote or very remote location categories. The government has decided to change the minimum turnover for Northern Australian companies to $750,000 on the Business Improvement Grant to bring those areas into line with the remote and very remote locations. For the rest of Australia, the minimum turnover is 1.5 million, and in all cases the maximum turnover for the industry business growth grants is $100 million. Just remember that there are restrictions on the type of business activity for the business growth grant. The businesses have to be in one of 9 specified priority industry classifications. But when you go through and work out what type of businesses relate to those 9 major classifications, you get over 500 individual types of businesses. So there's a whole stack of businesses can fall into those categories like advanced manufacturing and IT and infrastructure construction, etc. Are you registered for GST? Businesses need to be registered for GST. If you answer that the client is tax exempt, you won't be shown any grants within ESS BIZGRANTS because the system is geared to grants that are available to small, medium enterprises. And we ask the question, are you involved in research and development? Because if someone ticks that, we will explore the possibility that they might be eligible for grants like accelerating commercialization, because it's inconceivable to our minds anyhow that someone could be an applicant for accelerating commercialization if they haven't been undertaking research and development. So when you're filling in the profile, just bear in mind, please, that we're not asking there if they are eligible to claim research and development tax incentive. In other words, they've spent more than 20,000 and they are a company. What we're trying to get an inkling about is what is this business doing, and therefore do we have a chance of securing some other grants or a link to some other grants that they might not be aware about, you mightn't be aware about, and otherwise we might miss out on them. So that's that sort of overview. I'll just save that so I can just keep on summarizing. What you then need to insert is the address of the business. This was a business in Ipswich, Queensland. All that I put in was the postcode 4305. The system then determined that Ipswich is in the major cities of Australia because it's treated as being part of metropolitan Brisbane. There are some benefits, not many these days, for these sort of geographical divisions around the country. You can see one's now emerged for Northern Australia, those businesses north of the Tropic of Capricorn. If you've got clients in those areas, 750,000 is the minimum, but they have to be a company and they have to be in those priority industries as specified by the government. Business industry code, you need to insert the business industry code as released by the Australian Taxation Office. If you know it, you can place it directly into where I'm marking there at present. So just enter the code and then click on search grants, and the system will proceed with showing you the pending grants. If you don't know the grant, the classification, and I just got rid of it there now, you'll have to go in and insert a keyword. So I'm going to put in steel because that business is a steel fabricator. And if we then search, the system will show you the various industry classifications that have got steel in their name. So we might go for something a little bit different. We'll go for this other sheet metal products. That's what the business was. It's then reflected it on the left-hand side of the form, and we can then click on and go to search grants. This line here, full list of the business industry codes, click here. That's been deleted because the Taxation Office has withdrawn that chart for 2015. They want everyone to either insert the numbers because you know them or find them the way I just showed there using the keywords. And that line on our system's about to be withdrawn when our programmer does some maintenance next week. So you're then in a position to search grants. Now this is one that I've been working on, but so in this we've got pending grants of 11. We've already got 6 potentially eligible grants that we identified earlier when we were using this site. So we might look at an apprenticeship incentive for an existing worker, just to refresh your memory with how this system works. You first of all get the grant details, an executive summary if you like, of how the grant operates. You can view the funding, and on this one there's some various funding amounts available. You can view a paper or some additional information as to how this grant operates. So there's the industries that are on the National Skills Needs list. There's also a paper on how the apprenticeship scheme operates, so you can read that if you wish. And then there's some additional criteria that you need to answer. Are you an employer interested in engaging an existing worker as an apprentice? So if we answered yes, that's what we think our client might want to do. Incidentally, you could do this review with the client sitting opposite and just asking the question, or perhaps have them on the phone. Was the existing worker engaged under any of the following new employee undertakings? Apprenticeship training, skill-based apprenticeship. Now, if we answered yes to that, you're not going to be offered a grant, but we'll do that. So we'll answer yes just to show you. And has the worker been employed for the business for more than 3 months? Where he's been there for a little while, we'll answer yes. Now, the system is not giving us the go-ahead to process that one because we haven't answered at least one of the questions correctly. If we close now, what you're going to get is that that grant has been placed into potentially ineligible. So you need to look at the questions, and some of them you might want to change. Now, I've already put some into potentially eligible, and time's moving on, so I'm just going to flick through to that now. And if you then wanted to produce the report, you just click on Print Report. And there's the report that's been produced for Brisbane West Fabricators Proprietary Limited. It would have your name on it, your firm's name as the subscriber. Obviously, it's dated. And there's an executive summary of the various grants. Details of the grant amount is shown. And you then have a report to sit down and have a conversation with your client when they come in to have a meeting with you. My last recommendation is that you undertake a grant review every year when you complete the client's annual accounts. It will take less than 3 minutes to set the client up the first time in the profile. For subsequent years, as long as you've allowed the system to remain, or the information to remain in the system, we're using the cloud technology, so all you've got to do next year is update any of the details. It will take a little bit longer, maybe 6 to 10 minutes to answer some of the questions. You don't have to do anything else with the questions. You don't have to clear them out or anything like that. If you haven't answered them, you can leave them there. And just keep on working the following year. Then when the client comes in to see you, you're able to sit down and have a proactive discussion with them and then get their instructions. Either the client will decide one of 3 ways, basically. They'll decide that they're going to proceed with the grant application themselves. They'll decide that they're not going to do anything about it because a small minority of people don't like anything having to do with governments. And thirdly, I think they're more likely to say to you, will you help us do this application? So I'd be suggesting you open a separate fee file and tell them that and bill them separately for the work that you are then going to undertake. The real benefit out of government grants, it is an intro into business advisory services with your client. You should be able to bid for some of the work to be done. In most cases, you will have to submit a proposal and the client will have to get quotes from someone else because a lot of the government grants require 2 quotes to be submitted. That's a bit of a pain in the neck, but that's the way the system works. You've then got the possibility of not only helping the client to secure the grant, but then being able to do some of the work that the grant might be prepared to fund. Now, as an accountant, I've undertaken quite an amount of work in government grants, including business plans, strategic plans, project management on the grant project, budgets and cash flow forecasts, feasibility studies, debtors management, leadership training of managers in a business. So there's debtors management, if I've mentioned that before, human resources. So there's a wide range of activities that it's conceivable that an accountant could undertake that work. And that way you get an interesting project and your client's dealing with a professional that they know and trust. That's very important. And half of your fees getting paid by the government. So I'm just going to check once again to see whether we have any questions, because I'm just about at the end of what I was going to talk to you today about. So thank you very much. There's no questions. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Thank you for viewing. A copy of this webinar will be available in the next couple of days, and we will send you details of the link so you can link onto YouTube to get access to it. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.